I never imagined signing a marriage contract could feel like signing my own death warrant. And yet, there I was, clutching a pen that seemed heavier than a mountain, staring into the icy gray eyes of the man I had reluctantly agreed to wed. His name was Alexander Pierce. CEO, billionaire, ice in human form. I had read about him in the tabloids, untouchable, ruthless, impossible to even think about. And somehow, the universe, or maybe just a cruel twist of fate, decided I was the one to marry him for business reasons. My parents' insistence, the financial disaster looming over my family, and the cold pragmatism of life had pushed me into his world. "You look nervous," Alexander said, his voice like a velvet knife, smooth, measured, but sharp enough to cut through my self-control. He didn't smile, not even the slightest twitch of his lips. That was him, perpetually distant, untouchable, the kind of man who seemed to breathe control. "Of course I'm nervous," I snapped, unable to hide my exasperation. "I'm about to sign my life away to a man who probably doesn't even like me." Alexander raised an eyebrow, an almost imperceptible tilt that made my stomach twist. "I don't like many people," he replied evenly. "But this isn't about liking. It's about necessity." Necessity. That was the cruel little word that had bound me to him. And yet, as I studied him, his tailored suit, the precise cut of his hair, the way he seemed to command the very air around him, I couldn't deny there was something magnetic about him, something dangerously irresistible. The contract was signed, the papers stacked neatly on the polished mahogany table, and the room seemed to hold its breath with us. No confetti, no tears of joy, just the quiet tension of two lives colliding in a way neither of us wanted but neither could escape. The first days were brutal. Alexander treated me with the same cold professionalism he used with his board members. He didn't smile at me, he didn't offer small talk, and he certainly didn't attempt any kind of warmth. But there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when his guard slipped. A hand brushing mine accidentally, a quiet glance that lingered too long, a door held open just for me. Little things that made my heart ache with confusion and longing. I remember the first dinner we shared at his penthouse overlooking the city. I tried to make conversation, my voice cracking slightly under the weight of his scrutiny. "You don't have to pretend," he said suddenly, his eyes piercing mine across the candlelit table. "Pretending is exhausting, and you look exhausted." I blinked. Pretend? I hadn't realized I was pretending anything. And yet, his observation was like a mirror, reflecting a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. I was scared, yes, but I was also intrigued. Intrigued by him, by the way he moved, spoke, and existed in a way that was completely untouchable yet somehow magnetic. Our contract dictated our lives with ruthless precision. Public appearances together, private dinners that felt like interrogations, and endless strategic conversations about family businesses, finances, and obligations. But beneath the rigid schedule, life had a way of slipping in between the cracks. A late-night conversation over whiskey, a shared laugh at something ridiculous that happened on the news, a brush of hands while reaching for the same glass. One night, after a particularly tense day negotiating a merger that would secure my family's financial future, Alexander surprised me. He didn't announce it. He didn't give a warning. He simply appeared on the balcony where I had gone to breathe, a glass of aged bourbon in hand. "Rough day." His voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant, almost human. I exhaled, letting the tension escape me. "You have no idea," I murmured, leaning against the railing. The city stretched below us, a tapestry of lights and shadows, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make my chest tighten, my pulse quicken. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he stepped closer. The air between us shifted, charged with something unspoken, something forbidden yet inevitable. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly, though my words were half-hearted. Part of me wanted him to stay, wanted him to close the distance that had always seemed impossible. "I'm not sure what you mean," he replied, but his eyes betrayed him, revealing the tiniest crack in the armor he so meticulously maintained. And then, almost on instinct, our hands touched. Just for a second. Just enough to send a jolt through me that I wasn't prepared for. But it wasn't enough to break the barrier completely. Not yet. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. We argued, we clashed, we maintained appearances. But in the quiet moments, those rare, stolen seconds away from the world, we discovered each other. Alexander was not just a cold, calculating CEO. He was a man burdened by expectations, haunted by a past he never spoke of, and capable of deep, complicated emotions. And I was not just a pawn in a marriage contract. I was someone who could reach him, if only I could navigate the walls he had built. The turning point came unexpectedly. A business trip to Los Angeles, a hotel suite with a balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and a night so quiet that even the waves seemed to hold their breath. We were forced to share a space, forced to interact beyond the contract, and forced to confront feelings that had been simmering beneath the surface. I found myself laughing at one of his rare, sarcastic jokes, a sound that surprised even me. He watched me, his eyes softer, more attentive than ever before. And then, as if testing the waters, he reached for my hand. Not brushing it, not accidental, deliberate, tentative, but firm. "Don't make me regret this," he said, his voice low, almost a growl that sent shivers down my spine. I smiled, a mixture of exasperation and something tender I couldn't name. "Too late," I replied. "I've already started." And that was how it began. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cold walls between us crumbled. Moments of vulnerability led to trust. Trust led to intimacy. And intimacy led to something I never expected: love. Real, messy, unpredictable love. But it wasn't easy. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, moments when the past threatened to undo everything we had built. And yet, each challenge only brought us closer, forcing us to communicate, to compromise, to understand the humanity in each other. Alexander's stern exterior began to melt in ways I had only dared to imagine. And I found strength in his vulnerability, a connection that went beyond contract or obligation. By the time our contract was officially concluded, something had changed. We weren't just two people bound by necessity. We were two hearts intertwined, two lives irrevocably linked by choice, not obligation. And when Alexander finally smiled, it meant the polite, distant smile he gave to everyone else, but a genuine, full smile that reached his eyes. I knew we had arrived at something extraordinary. Love had found us in the most unlikely of places, a marriage contract designed for convenience. But it didn't matter anymore, because what began as necessity had blossomed into a love neither of us could have anticipated, a love that was real, profound, and utterly unstoppable. The weeks following our Los Angeles trip were different, lighter somehow. The rigid rhythm of our contract-driven life had shifted into something more organic, more vulnerable. Alexander still maintained his executive composure in public, still commanded boardrooms with that cold precision that made people both fear and admire him. But at home, behind closed doors, the walls were falling. It started with small gestures. A coffee waiting for me on the kitchen counter in the morning, perfectly brewed just the way I liked it. A text message during a long day, not about contracts or obligations, but a simple, "thinking of you." I would catch him staring at me sometimes, those gray eyes soft, contemplative, lingering just long enough to make my heart stumble. And I realized I was doing the same. One evening, after a particularly grueling week of business meetings, Alexander suggested we take a walk through the city. I raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "You're not planning to interrogate me on corporate law, are you?" I teased, slipping my hand into his as we exited the building. "No," he replied, his voice calm, almost playful. "I want to see the city, and maybe see you smile without worrying about everything." The streets of New York were alive, buzzing with energy, yet there was a quiet intimacy in the way we moved together. People passed by, oblivious to us, yet it felt like the world had contracted, leaving just the two of us in our own bubble. The hand I had taken tentatively before now felt natural, almost necessary. I couldn't imagine letting go. We found ourselves at a small, dimly lit cafe tucked away on a quiet side street. Alexander, ever the enigma, didn't order coffee or food immediately. He simply watched the room, the flickering candlelight reflecting off his sharp features, and I felt that familiar pull, the magnetic tension that had been growing between us since day one. "You've changed," I said softly, watching him. He looked at me, surprised. "How so?" "You're not just the CEO anymore," I said, smiling. "You're human, vulnerable, and somehow that makes you impossible to resist." His lips curved slightly, the faintest hint of a smile that made my chest tighten. "Impossible to resist, huh?" "Definitely," I whispered, leaning closer. My voice was low, barely audible over the hum of the cafe. "And I think you feel the same." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for my hand across the table, his touch firm but gentle. That simple act so ordinary, yet charged with meaning, made my pulse race. For the first time, there was no business, no obligation, no pretense. Just two people, discovering each other in the quiet spaces between the chaos of their lives. Our walk back through the streets was slower, more deliberate. We didn't speak much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken words and lingering glances. When we reached his apartment, he didn't let go of my hand. Instead, he guided me inside, the door closing behind us with a soft click that seemed to seal the world out. "You're staying in tonight," he stated, almost as if it were a command. I smirked, teasing him. "And what if I don't want to?" His gaze softened, and he leaned closer, the space between us shrinking until our breaths mingled. "You don't have to want to, but I want you here." That night marked a subtle but undeniable shift. We weren't just pretending anymore. There were kisses, soft, tentative, exploratory, and touches that spoke louder than words ever could. The ice around Alexander's heart was melting, and I was discovering the warmth hidden beneath years of control and restraint. Yet life wasn't just moments of quiet intimacy. The pressures of business, family expectations, and the looming public scrutiny were ever present. There were arguments, sharp and cutting, when frustrations boiled over. But even then, there was a strange tenderness in our conflicts, a desire to understand rather than destroy. One particularly tense afternoon, I caught him staring at me from across the office during a meeting. His eyes held that familiar intensity, and I felt my stomach twist. Later, when the day ended and we were alone, he pulled me into his office, shutting the door behind us. "I need to know something," he said, voice low, almost vulnerable. "Are you happy with this? With us?" I blinked, taken aback. The question was simple, yet the way he asked it so uncharacteristically open made my heart ache. "I am," I admitted softly, "more than I ever expected." "And you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, bridging the distance between us. His hand found mine, fingers entwining naturally, and his thumb brushed over my knuckles in a gesture that was intimate, deliberate. "I think I am," he murmured. "I don't know how it happened. I didn't plan for it. But I can't deny it anymore." That confession changed everything. Suddenly, the walls we had maintained between duty and desire, business and personal, fear and longing crumbled. We were no longer two people bound by a contract. We were two souls, choosing to be together despite the odds. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. We traveled for business together, yet each trip became an opportunity to explore our connection. In Chicago, we shared a quiet moment on a rooftop overlooking the city skyline, laughing at the absurdity of our situation and confessing fears we hadn't voiced before. In Miami, we walked along the beach at dawn, our hands entwined, sharing secrets and dreams under the pastel sunrise. Alexander, for all his stoicism, revealed sides of himself I hadn't expected. He had a wicked sense of humor, a passion for art and music, and a generosity that extended far beyond business. I found myself falling not into a life of ease or comfort, but into someone who made me feel alive, seen, and cherished. There were still moments of tension, moments when the past threatened to intrude. Old business rivals, family expectations, and the ever-present media scrutiny created cracks in our fragile sanctuary. But each challenge strengthened our bond, forcing us to communicate, compromise, and trust in ways neither of us had before. One particularly stormy evening, we found ourselves trapped in Alexander's penthouse during a torrential rainstorm. The city lights reflected off the wet streets below, casting a surreal glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. We were alone, the apartment silent except for the rhythmic patter of rain. "I hate that the world always seems so determined to interfere," I said, leaning against the glass, feeling the coolness seep through the pane. Alexander stepped behind me, hands resting lightly on my shoulders. "Then let's make our own world," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "A world where it's just us, and nothing else matters." I closed my eyes, leaning back into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. In that moment, all the struggles, all the fears, all the tension melted away. There was only him, only me, only this fragile, beautiful connection that had blossomed from something neither of us had anticipated. As the weeks turned into months, we continued to navigate the delicate balance between public obligation and private intimacy. Our love was no longer a secret, but it was ours, raw, authentic, and fiercely protected. We shared quiet breakfasts, long walks through Central Park, and stolen moments in the middle of bustling city streets. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word became a testament to a bond that had grown from necessity into something profound and unshakable. One evening, as we sat together in the living room of his apartment, the city lights twinkling below, Alexander reached for my hand. His gaze was steady, unwavering, full of the kind of certainty I had once thought impossible. "I never thought I'd find someone who understands me," he said softly, "who sees past the walls I've built. But you did. And I can't imagine my life without you." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I squeezed his hand, my voice trembling. "I feel the same. I've never felt this way before. About anyone." We sat in silence, the world outside fading into insignificance, until our lips met in a gentle, lingering kiss that spoke of trust, passion, and promises yet to be made. It was not just a kiss, it was a declaration, a vow, a recognition of everything we had been through and everything we would face together. From that moment on, our lives were irrevocably intertwined. We faced challenges, of course, business pressures, family obligations, and the occasional misstep, but we faced them together. And in each other, we found not just love, but a partner, a confidant, a sanctuary from the chaos of the world. The marriage contract that had once felt like a trap had transformed into the foundation of something extraordinary. It had brought us together, forced us to see past appearances, and ultimately led us to a love that neither of us had expected, but both of us cherished with every fiber of our being. In the quiet moments, when the city hummed softly outside our windows, I would watch Alexander, see the way he relaxed in my presence, and feel a warmth spread through me. We had started as strangers, bound by obligation, and yet we had become so much more. We had become each other's home, each other's anchor, each other's love. And in that love, we found a happiness that was no longer tentative or cautious, but bold, fearless, and real. Spring arrived in New York with a gentle warmth that seemed to echo the new rhythm of our lives. The city, once a backdrop for tension and obligation, now felt alive with possibility, a canvas on which our love could unfold. Alexander and I had settled into a comfortable, exhilarating routine, publicly polite, privately untamed. Every morning, I woke to the sight of him making coffee in the kitchen, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly messy, looking impossibly human and achingly intimate. "You're staring again," he teased one morning, catching my gaze as I watched him pour cream into my mug. "I can't help it," I said with a soft laugh. "You're mesmerizing." He smirked, leaning against the counter with that casual authority that had first drawn me in. "Good. Keep staring. Maybe it'll make you braver." I did. Braver to admit feelings, braver to explore desire, braver to embrace the life we were building together. We spent weekends walking through Central Park, enjoying the anonymity of crowded streets where no one knew our story. Hand in hand, we laughed at pigeons daring to chase us for crumbs, shared ice cream cones, and sometimes just sat silently on a bench, watching the city pulse around us. These moments of mundane perfection were ours, and they felt like rebellion against the world that had tried to dictate our relationship. One evening, Alexander invited me to a charity gala event that demanded formal attire and smiles for the cameras. I expected his usual cold professionalism, but he surprised me. "You look stunning," he whispered as we stepped onto the red carpet, his hand at the small of my back, guiding me. The press flashes lit up our faces, but in that moment, it was just him and me. "And you look less scary than usual," I replied, teasing, though my heart raced at the intensity in his eyes. He chuckled softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." The gala was a blur of polite conversation and subtle glances, but in the quiet moments between speeches, under the chandeliers, while serving or d'oversway found each other. A brush of his hand, a whispered comment, a shared smile, each charged with intimacy. I realized that love was no longer a fragile thing hiding behind contract obligations. It was bold, present, unstoppable. Back at his apartment, the city lights sprawled below us, casting patterns on the walls. I felt a surge of courage. I turned to Alexander, tracing the line of his jaw with my finger, and whispered, "Do you ever think about what this would have been if we had met differently?" He paused, eyes softening. "I do. Sometimes I wonder if the universe conspired to put us together this way. Contract, a forced marriage. Maybe it was the only way I could see you, truly see you." "I'm glad," I said, heart swelling, "because I can't imagine my life without you." He closed the distance between us, hands framing my face, and kissed me a kiss that was no longer tentative, no longer exploratory. It was full of assurance, of passion, of promises kept and dreams shared. It was a kiss that said, "I choose you," over and over. The weeks that followed brought a new level of closeness. Alexander began to open up about his past losses, fears, regrets, revealing vulnerabilities he had long kept hidden behind his corporate mask. I listened, offering my own truths in return, and we discovered that love was not about perfection, but about acceptance, about being seen and loved for who we truly were. One Sunday morning, we found ourselves in the quiet of his apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows. I was curled up on the couch, laptop forgotten on the coffee table, while Alexander leaned against the doorframe, watching me with that expression I had grown to adore. "You know," he said, voice low, "I never thought I'd feel this way, about anyone, about life. You've changed me." I smiled, reaching for his hand. "And you've changed me, made me braver, happier, more myself." He knelt in front of me suddenly, hands holding mine, eyes locked on mine with unshakable intensity. "I want this is forever. Not just a contract, not just moments stolen from the world. I want a life together, truly together." My breath caught. I had dreamed of this, feared it, longed for it, but hearing the words, feeling the sincerity, made my chest ache with emotion. "I want that too," I whispered. "More than anything." Alexander smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached his eyes and softened every edge of his usual coldness. And then, with a gentle laugh, he produced a small, sleek black box from his pocket. I froze. My heart raced. Inside was a ring, understated yet elegant, a symbol of commitment far deeper than any contract could ever dictate. "Marry me," he said simply, yet with a gravity that made the world still around us. Tears pricked my eyes as I nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes, yes, of course." The kiss that followed was electric, sealing a promise we had already lived for months, a testament to the journey from obligation to love, from strangers to soulmates. Our wedding was intimate, a blend of elegance and simplicity, with friends and family witnessing the culmination of our journey. There were no tabloids, no gossip, just love, laughter, and the warmth of two people who had defied odds and expectations to be together. Alexander, usually reserved and formal, couldn't hide his happiness. His eyes, always so controlled, shone with a light reserved for the most intimate moments. As we exchanged vows, I felt the weight of the past years lift. Every fear, every hesitation, every conflict had led us to this moment. And in that moment, I knew we had built something extraordinary, something that no contract, no challenge, no obstacle could ever diminish. The city around us, once a symbol of duty and pressure, now felt like a witness to our love. We danced, laughed, and embraced under the stars. Every touch and glance a reaffirmation of the bond we had fought to nurture. Alexander whispered sweet reassurances in my ear, soft and intimate, and I found myself lost in the warmth of him, the steadiness of him, the unwavering devotion that had grown from the cold, calculated man I had first met. Life after marriage was not perfect, but it was ours. We navigated careers, public expectations, and personal growth together, always returning to the simple truth. We chose each other, every day, for the rest of our lives. The love that had grown from a contract became the foundation of a partnership, a companionship, and a profound emotional connection. One quiet evening, months later, we found ourselves again on the balcony of our apartment, the city lights twinkling below. Alexander wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You know," he murmured, "I never imagined marriage could feel like this, like coming home." I smiled, leaning into him. "I know, me neither, but it's exactly what I wanted, exactly what I needed." And in that embrace, with the city alive around us and the world silent for just a moment, I knew that we had found something rare, something enduring, something real. The contract that had brought us together was gone, but the love it sparked remained stronger, deeper, and unbreakable. We had started with obligation, endured tension and challenges, and discovered intimacy and trust. And in the end, we had found joy real, unguarded, unwavering joy. Alexander kissed the top of my head, and I closed my eyes, savoring the quiet warmth. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but I had no fear, because we had each other, and that was enough. Love, in its messy, complicated, beautiful form, had transformed our lives. And as the city lights shimmered below, we smiled, content in the knowledge that we had chosen each other, that we had fought for each other, and that we would continue, together, for all the days to come. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.